So I need to know if you guys are like me. I need to know if people read like this as well because I think I think I'm a little strange with how I read books. And whenever I mentioned it to anyone, they were like, "Hey, what is that?" So I've always had like up to like 8 books at the same time in like a rotation. And if I DNF one or do not finish one, or I just put one down and I need something different, I'll go and read a different book. So I'm going to show you guys kind of how that works because it has worked for me and I know I'm like neurodivergent in some way. I don't know anything beyond that. I just know that I don't fit the cookie cutter kind of like focus. My focus is like so out of my control. Sometimes I can't control what I go deep dive on. I can't control like what I become interested in, right? So I need a variety of things to catch me when I fall. And someone called it book stacking. I guess it could be considered that. I never thought of it like that. But check this out. So I have 5 books here, right? I'll tell you about each one, but this is like what is currently on my brain, okay? So, what am I reading right now primarily? So, 2 of these are primarily being read, right? These two. My favorite grimdark fantasy author, Joe Abercrombie. This is The Heroes. And the more you read his book, the more I read his book, the more I'm enjoying it, okay? I'm 125 pages in and I'm just absolutely steamrolling through this. But there was a point where I put this down for a couple days and I picked up a different book and I started reading that book, which is a different genre altogether. Different approach, different genre, different everything you could think of, right? So this is like a very entertaining. Well, if I was a writer, I would want to write something like him, right? This is like all of his work super impresses me. Joe Abercrombie is just incredible. This is like the future after, like 12 years after the events of the first trilogy that I read from him, and then he's got like post trilogy that comes way later, and then like these 3 books in the middle, and this is like right in the middle of the trilogies. I just finished Best Served Cold like a couple months ago, and I was like, okay, I got to keep going with Joe Abercrombie, but I'm trying to savor him, so I'm trying not to just tear through it so fast. But yeah, my favorite grimdark fantasy author. He writes the most character centric. Just love the characters, love the dialogue. There's humor, punchlines, damn near artistry with the way he crafts like a paragraph or a chapter, starting things with one way, ending with a punchline, driving home like just great points all the time. Deep stuff and then shallow stuff and just like relatable, hilarious characters, gray characters morally. No one's like good or bad. Everyone's trying to be good, and sometimes they're horrible, and they don't. They're all trying to be good. They're all trying to do the right thing by themselves and by others, and super character driven. If you haven't read Joe Abercrombie, you should read the first Law trilogy. The first book is like all character development, though, but you'd come to love them so much that they're so entertaining that it's just hard to stop with Joe Abercrombie. And he's almost spoiled this genre for me, okay? That's how good he is. He spoiled me as a reader because I love how he writes this genre so much that when I read other authors from the genre, I don't get the same like dopamine or something. I don't know. This man's so good he's ruined me, okay? I love it. But I still put this down because I'm not always in the mood to read fantasy every day. I need something dark, something messed up, something brutal, something heavy. You know how you listen to different kinds of music? Well, that's what's going on with this. This is like okay, so Matthew Stocco. Let me just talk about him before I talk about this book. Matthew Stocco, he's written the one book that I think it was the most disturbing book that I've ever read. Okay, this guy is like deranged writer. Like he's masterful and excellent and dark. This is like a California noir, right? This is like, it's like if you mashed up like American Psycho with like something modern, and then like threw in, instead of it being like kind of imaginative and from like the late 80s, it's like it's a reflection on our like society, and instead of like New York Manhattan in the late 80s, it's more of like California noir, and it's called High Life. But that exists like a paradox of what the guy actually is in this book. He's like a low life kind of, not to say that, but he's like on the low tier. He's almost poor. He's like borderline like poverty, really tough life. His wife is certain worker of the night. He knows that. She turns up without organs and completely gone, dead. Uh, this book's dark. It's got a lot of messed up stuff, imagery, messages, commentary on like values. The guy's like obsessed with like being famous, and he's obsessed with like the perfection of famous people and pursuing like this imaginative world that he lives in, to just like he's super distracted by it. Meanwhile, his life is just like dark, falling apart. I am 58 pages into this book, and I'm going to keep going. So these two, I'm bouncing between them, right? Every day I'm bouncing between them. And they're perfect balance for me. One is just like super messed up, just intentionally like a dark story about like it's almost like it's like a reality almost. It's a California noir. It's got that like vibe to it that you don't know what's going to happen, where it's going, what's even going on. It's like a slice of life of this guy's life, and the strange people that are in it, and the people he comes across, and there's just a lot of messages underneath all of this stuff, and it's dark like literature, right? Really enjoyable for me though. The prose, the way it comes across. So I'm reading that right now. It's disturbing as well, and I like disturbing books, things that are like, you know, I wouldn't want someone reading this over my shoulder. They'd be like, "Hey, what the hell are you reading right now? That's a little cracked out. It's a little crazy, a little not mass appealing at all." Okay, so if you want something like things like this, get me back into reading if I ever fall off. I don't know what it is. It's not extreme horror at all. It really isn't. It's just like dark, messed up stories about like people's lives, and somebody out there definitely had a life like this for sure. So far, I'm 56 pages in, so I don't know what the hell's gonna happen, but so yeah, I opened that book up one day and I was like, I've had this on my shelf for months. I got it just because I liked this guy so much since he wrote Cows, and that like totally ruined my. Since I read that book, I still have images of like, and now actually since I read this book, there's some images already that are like gonna live rent free in my head for a long time. So that's the thing with these disturbing books. If you can't like handle that kind of thing, don't pick up anything like that. But if you can handle something that's like probably worse than your life in a lot of ways, probably worse than a lot of your imagination could even make up, some extreme stuff. Cows is a whole other level. I wouldn't recommend anybody go read that unless you really got the stomach for it. It's like a challenge. There was beauty underneath the story. Like there's got to be a commentary in that. There's got to be like themes and stuff he's exploring about people and life, and maybe even the meat industry. I don't even know. It's just I lost the book. I think I threw it out. I had to have thrown it out. There's two books that I just can't find. I've been looking for them since I started this thing. I go up in my attic and I'm like tearing through it, and I can't find it because I vaguely remember like removing those books from my life because they were so disturbing. But now I regret it because I'm at a different point in life and I could handle it. But I did finish those books anyway. High Life. It's not as ridiculously bad yet, but there's still like most of you guys that haven't read something like dark like that, like really bent, hell bent, like crazy stuff. That might mess you up. It's going to ruin your mood. It could mess you up psychologically. So please, I don't want to be responsible for harming your brain, okay? And then I got this kind of peripheral stack, right? This is a mix of like science books, nonfiction, and short stories. I always have that in my personal mix down. Like you have to find out who you are, what you're into, but there is a book for like every aspect of you, right? I have an inner scientist kind of like studying. I like to study. I always take the hardcover off, but this is The Greatest Show on Earth: The Evidence for Evolution by Richard Dawkins. Holy shit, this book is brilliant. Okay, so it goes through like how science has been built upon over the course of hundreds of years and maybe even thousands of years, and just all the sciences that go into like how we know what we know now about the world, evolution, breeding dogs, how like genes get manipulated, how form and function are like evolving next to each other, complexity theory. Um, this chapter right here is like how they use carbon dating and how they use tree ring dating to find dates of things. So it's like so many different beautiful things in all the chapters. Even one of the chapters is like how the lengths of moths' little proboscis match perfectly with the flowers that they feed off of, and then you have like mimicry, that things that fake it so that the moths come up to them and think that they're a flower but they're not. It's just like this whole thing, it just keeps building upon science, and it's you're learning about the world, you're learning about very important science. And I took a lot of science classes, so a lot of this is just like a nice review to help me remember because I've been out of school for a long time. So this is Richard Dawkins. He's got some atheist books and like stuff like that. This isn't really about like religion at all. It's just an evolution book that's mostly about science behind Charles Darwin, people who built upon his theories that came after. Like it's got pictures in it. I mean, this is one of the best things I ever picked up. I absolutely love it. You learn more in this than you will, I don't know, a bunch of years in school trying to learn science. I mean, this shows you how things self-organize and cells adopt other pieces of other cells to survive, and just so many scientific, beautiful things that I'm glad that I have this. So this is in my periphery, right? So when I'm not feeling like reading fake stuff, fiction stuff, I need something like where I feel like I'm going to be studying for a little bit, like a little bit smarter. I'll take notes even. I'll get my journal out and take notes while I read this. This is one of those, okay? So I like to have one like that in my mix. So I have disturbing stuff like death metal, right? I have the fantasy stuff to entertain my imagination and to be an entertaining book. Then I have the science stuff for when I need to engage with something and feel like I'm learning a little bit. I need to study a little bit. I like to push myself and get a little bit more knowledge as I go. I also have another nonfiction book, which is a study on perception. Somebody in my coaching Discord that I participate in, there's 2,000 other jiu-jitsu coaches in there. Someone recommended this, and I'm glad they did, because it shows like so far how our perception extends far beyond our conscious perception. So just for the first chapter is like these blind people who lead on bicycles. They lead like people who have vision. They lead and tour them on bike trails, but they go all by echolocation, and the science behind like studying echolocation and how echolocation can be developed in us and how we already have it. We can hear the space that we're in. We can kind of like see without looking. We just haven't developed it because we use our eyes so much. But basically, this whole book is about different perception, different parts of our perception: hearing, taste, smell, touch, you name it, all the things that make our perception up. This is like scientific studies, and it all ties in nicely, right? I have a bunch of other books in this vein, right? But this is the one that's currently it's in my peripheral books. So I'll pick this up and study out of it. I usually write when I'm reading on this, I'll write in my journal. I won't write in the book, although I do write in my books occasionally. So, like in High Life, I've been annotating in here and writing in here. You know, you can see some of it. Right. I'll write at the end of it. I'll write little blurbs because I think there's a lot going on, and I'm like following along with the book and engaging with the author. And then I have an entertaining kind of short story thing if I feel like I fall off. This is like a last. I really like this author. I covered his book Wounds, which is a bunch of short stories, 6 stories from the borders of hell. This came out more recently than that, and it's about mostly human nature, a lot of like relatable stories, but monsters. It's horror, sort of fantasy kind of deal, but it's all short stories, and I like the author, so I'm reading this. So that's in my periphery. So I have like these direct books that I'm always reading, and then I'll diverge when I get stale with them because I don't just tear through one book usually. I usually have a stack of books that I revolve through depending on my mood, depending on the way my brain's working that day. So let me know if that's something that you do. If you read like I do, or if you read at all. I mean, a lot of us buy a lot of books. Like I've bought a lot of more books than I've read, but I do have a way of getting them all into my mind, and then sometimes one will just stick and you'll just tear through that, right? But I like to have a flexible nature. I don't like to put a lot of pressure on myself to force myself to read any one thing. It's all from my enjoyment. And, you know, I like having this always to grab. And now I grab one. It's not like I choose, it's like they choose me, you know? It's the book jumps out at me and I'm like, "Oh, I really want to read this one today." And however I categorize, and I can read them all without being like inundated, right? Maybe you guys can do that, maybe you can't. I don't know. I'm just happy that I found something that works for me, and maybe it works for you too. Everyone's different, and I feel like there's going to be a group of people who definitely this works for, and some of you guys it definitely does not work for, because I understand that everyone has a very unique mind. Anyway, if I had to recommend any of these to you guys, Joe Abercrombie. If you want to read fantasy, just go start reading Joe Abercrombie stuff. I'd say close second is John Gwynne. Those two authors, between those two guys, you have thousands of pages of books to read. There's more. I'll make another fantasy and another disturbing horror kind of like standalone video. Some short stories, science books that changed my life because I can go off on the deep end about those. Science did change my life a lot this year, but I can't get into that right now, but one day I will. Ecological approach, submission grappling, got a lot to cover, a lot of good stuff to cover. I'm very excited for all this. So thank you guys. Let me know how you're reading, what you do. I like to know these things. It all goes into my research. For now, adios. Thanks a lot.